Hey, hello, hi, it's me, KJ Speaks, and you're listening to Seated with the Word. With me, KJ Speaks, on the station Heaven Listens to, Viva Radio FM. Okay, welcome, and welcome back to anyone who was here last week. I'm really glad you're here tonight, and if you were with us for John chapter 1, you know that we've been moving through the Gospel of John. Last week, we talked about who John is, the author of this gospel, and we did so together slowly, honestly, with no pretense, asking questions, and even like taking homework home and digging deeper for ourselves. And if this is your first time joining us, don't worry. You don't need any theology degree to sit here with us. You just need to show up, which is super exciting. And that's all that God wants. That's it. So let's talk about tonight's study. Tonight, we're going to be diving into John chapter 2. And if you want to know, before we even open the text, I'll give you a little background about what's going on specifically in this chapter. And I'm not going to read every single verse, so this synopsis is helpful. And it's also going to surprise you. So, in this chapter, because um, Jesus was revealing himself and gathering disciples in chapter 1, we meet a Jesus here that is not exactly who most people expect him to be. And the setting is that he's at a wedding, he's flipping tables toward the end of the chapter, and he's dropping hints about something nobody around him fully understands yet but him. And so John does a beautiful job of teasing us and then constantly revealing what Jesus is trying to communicate this whole time. So I ask you to grab something to snack on, some water, whatever, and let's get into it. So we are going to read John chapter 2, verses 1 through 2. And I'll read those directly out of my text. I have the NLT version here. You can read from any version you want. And so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. It reads, "The next day, there was a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples were also invited to the celebration. The wine supply ran out during the festivities. So Jesus' mother told him, 'They have no more wine.' 'Dear woman, that's not our problem,' Jesus replied. 'My time has not yet come.' But his mother told the servants, 'Do whatever he tells you.' Standing nearby were 6 stone water jars used for Jewish ceremonial washing. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told the servants, 'Fill the jars with water.' When the jars had been filled, he then said to them, 'Now dip some out and take it to the master of ceremonies.' So the servants followed his instructions. When the master of ceremonies tasted the water that was now wine, not knowing where it had come from, although, of course, the servants knew, he called the bridegroom over. 'A host always serves the best wine first,' he said. 'Then, when everyone has had a lot to drink, he brings out the less expensive wine. But you have kept the best until now.' This miraculous sign at Cana in Galilee was the first time Jesus revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After the wedding, he went to Capernaum for a few days with his mother, his brothers, and his disciples." Okay, a lot just went down there, right? And a lot went down that I definitely don't want to gloss over. So, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and that his disciples believed him, right? It says that in plain English in the text. But I want to slow down on a lot of parts of this text so that we don't miss it, because there's so much more in here that is really easy to rush past. And that's what we're here to do, to slow down, dig deeper, and gain a fuller understanding of who God is. So, first, let's talk about the setting. They're not in a temple, They're not in a synagogue at all, right? Jesus' first recorded miracle in the entire Gospel of John happens at a party, a wedding celebration to be exact. And for me, that tells us something right away about the kind of God that we're dealing with. He doesn't just show up in a synagogue, right? He's not just in the sacred, informal, and religious moments of our lives, right? He shows up in the ordinary ones, right? The human ones, and most importantly, the ones where somebody ran out of wine and they were panicking and they didn't know what to do. And so um, let's talk about what actually happens again, but slowing it down. So, running out of wine in this context, right, at a wedding, um, was not a small thing in this culture. A wedding feast could go on for several days, and the host was responsible for that hospitality the entire time. That's a huge deal, right? Like, you really have to be thoughtful and meticulous in how much wine you're purchasing and how it's being served throughout the night. So, running out meant public shame, it meant failure. And it was a real problem for real people. And that matters because Jesus didn't perform his first miracle to impress a crowd. That wasn't it. He did it because, as we read in the text, someone needed help. Okay? So, another part I want to slow down on is his mother, Mary. So, she runs to Jesus and she tells Jesus the problem, right? She says, they have no more wine. And he basically says, this isn't my moment yet, mom. And like, I shouldn't be bothered with this. And what does Mary do? She does not argue with Jesus. She does not push at all. She turns to the servants and she says, do whatever he tells you. And she steps away. I love this moment in interaction between Jesus and his mother because it's one of the like quieter, powerful acts of faith in the gospel where she didn't know what he was going to do. She just knew who he was. She knew this was the Son of God, right? And she was just like, okay, just do what he says. And then let's talk about the jars, okay? Let's slow down on the jars. These were not decorative jars, right? These were not stone jars used for anything. These were stone jars used for ritual purification. They were ceremonial washing for religious laws, right? Jesus takes these vessels of religious obligation and fills them with something new. Okay? Something that produces joy, wine. Something that makes the master of the banquet stop and say, wait, you saved the best for last? Wow. Because in that time, like that was backwards. And he says that, right? The custom was to serve the good wine first, get people drunk, right? And then the cheap wine, so no one would be able to tell the difference because they're already having a good time. They're lit. But here, the best arrives at the very end. And I think what John is really trying to like help us to hear in this miracle um, is that what God is doing through Jesus isn't a lesser version of what came before. He's sharing with us that it is the fullest, richest expression of it, held back into exactly the right moment. And like that foreshadowing is beautiful. And it's also a symbolism of out with the old, in with the new. So before we move on, think about this. Mary brought a problem to Jesus before she knew what he would do. When was the last time you did that? Not after you had a plan, not after you figured it out or how it might work out. Just, here's the problem, God, and I trust you. It's a really great posture to follow. And then let's think about the servants in this section. They had to draw the water out before they knew it had changed. They moved in faith before they had proof. Has there ever been a moment in your life, or is there an upcoming moment in your life, where God has asked you to move before you could see the miracle? Sit with those. That's your homework for today's study. They're really great questions and really good postures to mimic. So let's talk about part two. And I love part two because Jesus gets spicy in my words. And it's titled in my book, Jesus Clears the Temple. I'll read verses 13 through 22. I'm going to go slow because there's a shift that happens in this chapter, and there's a complete different energy that we pick up and see from Jesus for the first time in the Gospel of John. And so it reads, "It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. So Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them all out of the temple. Oh. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money changers' coin over the floor, and turned over their tables. Then, going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, 'Get these things out of here. Stop turning my father's house into a marketplace.' Then his disciples remembered this prophecy from the scriptures. 'Passion for God's house will consume me.' But the Jewish leaders demanded, 'What are you doing? If God gave you authority to do this, show us a miraculous sign to prove it.' 'All right,' Jesus replied. 'Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.' 'What?' they exclaimed. 'It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days?' Jesus answered, 'This temple,' he meant his own body. What?' they exclaimed. 'It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and you can rebuild it in 3 days?' But when Jesus said this temple, he meant his own body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered he had said this, and they believed both the scriptures and what Jesus had said. Jesus and Nicodemus. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus did not trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. Okay, so let's back up. Jesus made a whip. He flipped tables, he scattered money across the floor, and he drove animals out of the building. This was not a gentle moment. This was not even a polite correction. Go back and read the text. This was physical, this was disruptive, and it was righteous anger. And it came directly from Jesus, fully God and fully human. And in this exact moment, he was furious. What does this tell us? I believe that it means that anger is not automatically a sin. So the question is always, what is it in service of then? Like your anger. What is it in service of? Right? Because the good book just said, be angry, but sin not. And my question is like, what made this worth it to Jesus? Right? So here's what's happening. The outer courts of the temple The court of the Gentiles is what it was called, was the one space specifically set aside for non Jewish people to come and worship. And it truly was just a place for everyone, um, the outsiders, right, outside of the Jewish people on the margins. Um, and what they did with this space is that they had turned it into a marketplace with the money exchangers there, right? Today you'd call it the currency exchange, right? These money exchangers were exchanging Roman coins for a temple currency at exploitive rates, right? That's what's being said here in the text. More importantly, they're taking advantage of the poor, the vulnerable, and the people who had traveled far just to have an encounter with God. I'm pausing there on purpose because that's interesting. Jesus wasn't angry because people were being religious, right? He was angry because the one space meant to be accessible to everyone had been turned into a transaction. And that he would not leave alone, right? That is what caused him to be furious and flip the tables. Let's talk about the religious leaders. So they come to him and they say, "What sign can you show us? Like, who gave you the authority to do this?" I think it's very comical. And what happens here is that Jesus says something that really stops everybody code, because they're like, "What are you saying?" Um, and he's like, "Destroy this temple, I'll raise it up again in 3 days." He's basically saying, "Come at me, bro." In very layman term. Um, but they think he's actually talking about the actual building, because, like, listen to their response. They're like, "It took us 46 years of construction to build this. There's no way." And so they're thinking he's saying, like, "I could do in 3 days what you did in 46 years." But John tells us plainly that he's talking about his body, his death, his resurrection. Happy Good Friday, by the way, everybody. And he drops it right here in chapter 2, in the middle of the confrontation about tables and money, like a seed that nobody noticed being planted. Amazing. The disciples didn't understand it in the moment, but they had understood it after. And I think that right there is one of the most honest things in this gospel, right? It's the realization that the people closest to Jesus were often confused in real time about the message, the word that Jesus was conveying. They only made sense of it looking back. It's amazing. So before we move on, of course, I have questions about this section, just to cause you to think and ponder. So in this, Jesus was moved um, to action by injustice happening in a sacred space. I'll ask you, what spaces in your life, your home, your relationships, your community, your church, or even in your own heart, where have you slowly become something other than what you were meant to be? And where have some of your practices have become slowly something other than what they were meant to be? And what would it look like to let God clear some of that out? It's just a question. Okay, the last section, we head into part 3. And while I already read part of these verses, I want to slow down on them because these 3 verses close the chapter. They're short, but they're also very heavy and very revealing. So it reads, verse 23 through 25. Because of the miraculous signs Jesus did in Jerusalem at the Passover celebration, many began to trust in him. But Jesus did not trust them because he knew all about people. No one needed to tell him about human nature, for he knew what was in each person's heart. That's very heavy. And something that I want to sit with the group and all of the listeners today is that so far we're seeing that lots of people are starting to believe in Jesus. But their belief is based on the miracles that they're seeing, right? And they're watching him perform. And it's a spectacle. They're so excited. They're like, no way. And what John is revealing to us in this very end of the chapter is something quietly startling. It is this: Jesus doesn't fully entrust himself to the people because he knows people and he knows what's in a person. And I just want to make it very clear here in the text that this isn't cynicism, right? That's being relayed in verse 23 to 25. This is discernment. He's not pulling back because he doesn't love them, right? He knows that belief built only on what one sees or feels is extraordinary is fragile. He knows that the people who follow the miracle worker can disappear when the miracles stop, or when the miracles aren't doing what they expected them to do, or when the cost gets real for them. But here's what I don't want you to miss in these entire chapter is that Jesus still shows up. He still shows up to the wedding. He still cleared the temple, right? And he still performed the signs and miracles, despite knowing exactly who these people are and despite knowing exactly who we are. The good, the messy, the in between, he shows up anyway. And right there is just some tension to sit in. And it's not tension by accident, right? John is sharing with us that, like, something is building here. And something that is building is truly a part of a through line throughout the entire gospel. Jesus knows us completely. He loves us despite of who we are. And he keeps inviting us into something deeper than the miracles, deeper than the spectacle. So, to close out, a few last questions to unpack this section. It says that Jesus knew what was in each person. And how does it feel to be fully known? Not partially, not the version of you that you present on social media, but all of you, all the secrets. How does it feel to be fully known and know that he is still here? Okay, another question I have is, what is your faith actually built on? Right? And would it survive if extraordinary moments stopped or never came ever again? Just a real good questions to sit with, because we're going to see them, those types of questions, unfold for characters throughout the rest of the gospel as written by John. So, in recap, John chapter 2 gives us two scenes that feel completely different: a celebration and a confrontation. And then the three last versions of the chapter really reframe both of those scenes for us, right? We have a wedding where Jesus brings abundance where there was lack, which is super exciting, right? And then we have a temple where corruption and really blasphemy is being performed, and he restores purpose where there was exploitation. And at the end of the chapter, he looks out at a crowd of believers and he holds something back. And not because he doesn't love us and because he didn't love them, but because he knows the difference between faith that is built on what you see and faith that endures. So, that thread will be running through all of the gospel. And just to reiterate again what that thread is, it is that Jesus is not who any of us expected. Not at the party, not in the temple, not in the riddle about the 3 days, right? He keeps exceeding this frame that people are trying to put around him. And that is something really encouraging and special. And it's still true today that many of us are trying to frame him. So I ask that whatever frame you came in with tonight and study, um, I'd ask that you think that he's probably larger than it. Not probably, but he is. So next time, we're going to be in John chapter 3, and we get an opportunity to meet a new character, um, a religious expert that comes to Jesus in the middle of the night. And he hears the most famous verse in the Bible for the very first time, and you don't want to miss it. It's truly a treat. And I'm looking forward to this next week with you. Go home, study the word again, ask your own questions. Okay, guys, that's about all we have for tonight. But do stick around for the replay at 10 p.m. And also keep it locked for the NYC Chills replay with DJ Flores coming up at 9 p.m. Signing off from Chicago, it's your girl, KJ Speaks. Bye.